Okay, welcome. This is the final of our three. We're looking at bringing research to life. In this session, we're looking at dissemination in social and digital age. I'm with Joe. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Hello, I'm Joe Towns, and I lecture on the Sports Broadcast Masters course up at Cardiff Met.
And obviously, you've had the visual, the audio. This is the third and final session. For those that maybe haven't seen those, my name's Dr. Nick Young. I am a senior lecturer within education. So in this session, we're thinking about trying to pull everything together. So we've looked at the visual side, so your posters, videos, infographics. Joe's talked to you about podcasts, the audio side, interviews, and then this final session is really pulling it all together. So we're thinking about in this session, it's the same research, multiple formats, and multiple audiences. So we've talked about in the other sessions, why dissemination matters. And I think what's so important is that research isn't finished until it's actually shared. So hopefully in this session, we bring everything together to think about how you can actually share this with a wider, potentially global audience. Um, we think about research, in terms of that, the importance of sharing it, in terms of public impact, if you think about ref and the context, really important that the impact that it's actually having, that dissemination, the visibility, the influence you can have. And we'll hopefully talk to you in this session about the opportunities and networks that you can build. And that's definitely an area where Joe, you're an expert. I don't know if you want to come in and say anything there.
Yeah, I definitely think so many of these digital platforms, social media platforms are free. So it's crazy not to use them. And it's the same with when we're making content for different audiences. We try to go to where the audiences are. So we're always thinking about the different platforms and the different audiences where we can find our community, where we can build an audience. So you just have to start to, experiment with these different platforms to try and find the one where your community is. When Nick and I started 10 years ago, a lot of academics were on Twitter. Now things have changed on Twitter and it's not really the right space anymore. But now LinkedIn has come along. So we'll talk about LinkedIn later, but it's trying to find the right social media platform to help you disseminate, share, and like Nick has said, improve your visibility, improve your searchability. When people are searching for things, they're more likely to find your work, your research, the keywords around your research, if you've put it in certain places online.
And that field, that landscape is huge. So there are other platforms that definitely you can use. You don't have to use these ones, but these are what we're going to focus on today. So, we're going to talk to you about LinkedIn, thinking about your professional identity. For that longer form thinking, you've got more space to explore ideas. You think about blogs and Substack. Instagram is great for sort of visual storytelling, more of that short form impact, same as TikTok. I'm always amazed with TikTok. We've got a course page, and some of the numbers that we get from videos, and it tends to be, if I make it, I might get three or four views. If some of my students make it, who are more attuned with using TikTok, they could get thousands and thousands of hits. It tends to be just my nan that watches my stuff. So there's, as Joe mentioned, there's Twitter, which is now X, which, yeah, a lot of academics have moved from, but there's still a bit of a space there for maybe some networking. And then YouTube again for explainers. Again, Joe, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything in the sort of landscape realm.
Yeah, I think just going to Instagram as well. If you have made a podcast, as we discussed in one of the other sessions, then actually the way of getting your podcast seen more widely is to make shorter clips. The best bits from your podcast might work as vertical clips on Instagram. So it's really about using all the available platforms. So many clips I see from podcasts, I just see them on Instagram. So it's sometimes using a social media platform to reach audiences that might then come back to your longer form content, which might be a blog or might be a YouTube video. So it's kind of using the different platforms to push audiences, potential people who might read your work back to where you want to watch them, have them enjoy the long form version.
I think it's important to say as well, I was chatting to a colleague about this, and this can feel like really daunting, and you may not, and I definitely don't feel like an influencer in any way. You don't have to be an expert in any of these. And sometimes this is almost like learning a new language, especially with things like TikTok. But I think if you're not starting to engage with some of these platforms, a lot of your opportunity to share your message is just going to be lost. So I think it's important maybe not to engage with all of these, but to try and start to think about building a community, as Joe said, and trying to get your message out there. Maybe even with one of these, I think it is going to be important for that visibility for your research. So to start off, LinkedIn, LinkedIn's great, as Joe's mentioned. We've got some ideas there in terms of what you could post, and Joe's going to share some of his examples in a moment. But things like research summaries, conference reflections, maybe what I learned this week. Some people use it really well as almost like a diary of, their journey on their research. Visual outputs. You also get that immediate feedback. You can pose questions if you're starting to think about maybe you're stuck with a certain chapter. Obviously, think ethically in terms of what you're sharing. But there's some really good examples of sort of posts with articles, groups, comments. I find LinkedIn's brilliant for just building your network. So if you've got quite a niche sort of research area and you're trying to identify a certain sample, or if you're just trying to identify an area to work with, the LinkedIn groups and communities are absolutely brilliant. Um, Joe, if I share your um, screen, do you mind talking
Yeah, I've been
through?
using LinkedIn. I've been using LinkedIn for 6 or 7 years, so as a kind of early adopter onto it. But it's brilliant. You can follow people. So the first thing you would do is get your account looking nice and clean with a picture that suits the image you want to put out there. It might be in the classroom. It might be giving a lecture at a conference. That banner, you can do these things on Adobe Express. So I know Nick has talked about Adobe Express in other sessions, but it has templates that are made specifically for LinkedIn, whether that's the banner at the top or the photo that you use or any little thumbnails you want to make. So you start following people. So follow other academics in your field, and you'll start to see the sort of things they post. And you'll start to see that they post regularly or that they engage with each other. The way of engaging is like any other social media platform, comment underneath. The great thing about LinkedIn is there isn't really any negativity on there. It doesn't make sense to be toxic in that space. So it's a really professional space. So you actually put the best version of yourself there and you talk about your professional world. It's not really about where you went on a holiday or what you had for dinner. It's about your work. And the algorithms are really powerful. So I follow thousands of people. I only ever follow people from my industry, media, sports media and academics, and where that crossover between higher education and the professional sports broadcast industry is. So the algorithm makes sure that you see lots of really interesting articles about what you teach. So I'm always finding things on there that inspire my thinking around teaching. And it's really good because you see that someone else who's teaching your subject in another part of the world is thinking about the same things. The other thing, you can put photos on your posts, which are really visual. It's starting to favor video and things are getting a bit more seen, but the article page is really good. We'll go on to talk about Substack and conversation, but I think the LinkedIn article section is really easy. If you can get to my articles, Nick,
Yeah.
I often just choose punchy headlines, things that I think other lecturers will read, things that maybe potential students might read, but think about it's a bit like YouTube as well. You do a how-to, or here's 5 things I learned about. And that's the way people like to read things now. We call them listicles. It's an article that's also a list. But the articles are great here because you can embed video, YouTube clips, you can embed photos, you can change the font. And I'm not that technical, but I find this really easy to use. So I do think LinkedIn articles, if you're thinking about a slightly longer form, 750 word write up, but that you can also drop in pictures and videos. It's really, really good.
Right. Cautious, we only got 20 minutes. So if you've mentioned there about blogs, Substack, for those that maybe haven't seen it, Substack, if you think of it maybe I'm more used to using a lot of the traditional blog format, but this is a space for both of these where you've got a bit more space, where you can start to develop your voice, share ideas, really start to cultivate a community, build that audience over time. And some examples here of some of the posts. So, what surprised me in my data, and you can pick apart over a few paragraphs, maybe some surprising results, findings from your data, three key findings from my research, why this issue matters. It's low pressure, high authenticity, and again, you can start to cultivate that audience over time. Joe, I don't know if you want to mention anything about Substack.
Yeah, I'm getting into Substack increasingly, and like LinkedIn, you just start to follow different people, and you're reading long form articles where people have really thought about what it is they're saying. Um, I'm finding there's a lot of thought leaders in this space. So people are thinking about how things are changing, and anything about change is what attracts new readers. They want to know what's changing in your specific industry and try and capture the moment, the conversation at that point. And we'll talk about some conversation articles that I've done in a moment, but it's just what are people interested in and what it allows you. If you've done a huge piece of research, you just might want to talk about one small piece of that research. And it allows you to kind of distill all your research into a shorter form article that a lot of people are more likely to read. It is a slightly different style of writing, slightly less academic and slightly more entertaining. But I just think if you want your research to be read, sometimes this is the gateway into that, to write a shorter article with a punchy headline that will kind of attract potential audiences in your area, and they might then come through to learn about your research or just get in touch with you to help you build your community.
It's almost just like a side door into welcome them to the work you do. I did a blog recently for Bera, and it was such a small part of the research that we were doing. We're doing a lot of work in Rwanda. They wanted us to focus on some of the virtual aspects of how we set up the collaboration, which is such a small part. But actually, then it gets people reading about your research, and then they get to read other journals that you've done. So yeah, so it's a really sort of nice side door. You mentioned there, Joe, about conversation. Um, so do you want to share a little bit about what the conversation is and maybe some of that global impact
Yeah,
it
you'll
can
see
have?
under the title of the conversation there, it's called Academic Rigor, Journalistic Flair. So it's still all about accuracy, and it's still important that anything you say in there is kind of peer reviewed and it's is coming from a reliable source. But it's by that we mean it's kind of topical. And so this piece is something I wrote about the World Cup. The conversation approached me because the stuff I for us, which is about technology at the World Cup. And that's a really interesting subject, whether you're just into broadcasting or you're into sport. So this piece was all about VAR and AI avatars and how they're going to use data, how there's extra cameras on the referee, explaining spider cams, drone cameras, and how things might be different in this World Cup. So from writing that article, I was then contacted by numerous radio stations in Austria and in Ireland. So before you know it, I'm talking about my passionate subject, my academic subject, to a global audience. And I think that's what we want. We want to disseminate our work far and wide. That's why we do the work, and we want to amplify the work that we've done. So there are these platforms, whether it's an article on LinkedIn, whether you build a page on Substack, or whether you go to conversation and you can pitch to the conversation. There are people at Cardiff Met in the marketing team who you can get in touch with and say, I've got an idea for an article for the conversation. But think about the why now. I did one last year on sport and poetry, and I did it just before Wimbledon because I'd, back in a former life, worked at Wimbledon and had often used poetry to make a broadcast VT that would go out before the final at Wimbledon. We might ask Serena Williams to read a poem, or John McEnroe would read a poem, and it was just something that people wouldn't expect. That sport and poetry are these perfect partners when it comes to broadcasting. And I thought, yeah, that might make a nice article on the eve of Wimbledon. So think about the when and the why you might publish a certain article to make it more relevant, more searchable. You'd be really surprised. There'll be lots of things in your research posts that you might think are just the sort of thing you always talk about, but it's really interesting to wider audiences. But you have to frame it in a way, give it a headline, or drop it at a certain point in the year that makes it more relevant to wider audiences.
Right. Move on now, talking to maybe some of that short form. So Instagram, TikTok, great for 60-second explainers, the carousel of posts. So maybe you've got some ideas that you can maybe make more visual. I really like some of the day in the life of a researcher. It can feel quite lonely if you're doing masters, PhD, postgraduate study. Sometimes you don't have that community. So sometimes sharing that digitally can be really, really helpful. Sort of really focusing on key ideas. It helps you as well to distill. I remember my research supervisor would always say to me in preparation for Viva, you know, you have to distill your ideas, ready to talk to someone on a bus stop about your ideas. And I found that really hard to try and distill these really complex findings that I had and try and tell a common lay person on a bus stop. So I think it's really good for actually helping you to distill your ideas into something that can go on this short form sort of research communication. Um,
Yeah,
Really good to start with a
I'll jump
hook.
in.
Sorry, Joe, go on.
Yeah, so no, no, you go for it, Nick.
No, just saying that I think sometimes because there is so much information on Instagram, so much information on TikTok, it's quite nice to start to think about starting with a hook. So did you know? Most people get this wrong. So you have that buy-in. So thinking about the first few seconds, if you are doing anything, any videos or anything, think about what's going to hook them to watch a bit longer. But go on.
Yeah, it's following on from what Nick said about hooks. If any of you have watched Mr. Beast on YouTube, there's a new way of storytelling in these spaces where you say at the start what you're going to tell people. It's a bit like if you do a presentation and you say, today I'm going to talk about these three things. So there's an old saying where you say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Okay, so it's a sort of a structure where you kind of give away the best bit, hooks people in, and then you explain how you did it. But really, what we're talking about is finding the storytelling platform that suits you. If you like to write articles, then it's Substack and it's LinkedIn and it's the conversation. But if you like short form, um, and you like having a bit of fun. So the good thing about Insta and TikTok is they're really about fun and entertainment, whereas the conversation and Substack might be seen as a bit more serious. But actually, you can have some fun here. And I've seen a lot of things Nick students have done and my students. We do POV videos, point of view, where whatever it is you're doing for that day, film a kind of a day in the life, like Nick mentioned, and then put a voiceover over the picture. So it might only be 40 seconds, but it's here's a day in the life of an academic researcher. And yeah, you've got to film the classroom or the laboratory, or you've got to film yourself going into the library, but it's just point of view filming. And at the moment, those are popular online. That'll change. Social media is full of fads, it's fickle, it's kind of fashionable, and it's all about trends. So whatever we talk about now might be out of date in a year or so, but actually, it's just about short form storytelling. So it's telling your story in a way that you think might make it entertaining in 30 seconds, in 40 seconds, but you're not dumbing it down. You're just making it more accessible and more digestible. And the idea is they get to know you and they might come and read your longer form research as well.
So I guess, thinking about bringing this all together and maybe what you could do. So an example maybe of a workflow we thought about is that maybe you start to write a blog, Substack post. Maybe you pick out and focus on some key areas. From that, then you could extract some key points. Maybe create a LinkedIn post or an Instagram carousel. So you've got a series of pictures. Maybe even if you're brave enough to do a TikTok video, thinking about maybe some of the stuff that Joe taught you with the podcasts. So that's one piece of research, and you've got five outputs, and really thinking about you've got quite a wide audience that you could potentially gain there. Joe, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I had a lecture last year that the students really enjoyed where we were looking at quite a difficult theory around documentary narrative structure. and there's 6 different documentary modes. But we just said to the students, go to the library, go online, find out as much as you can about that documentary mode, and then make it into a TikTok video. And they just really enjoyed it. It was engaging, it was fun. So we think this is, you've got a big piece of research you've done, but can you distill it into short form? And Nick mentioned Instagram carousels, which again are really popular at the moment because they engage people. You swipe through 7 or 8 photos. Each of those photos might be a little thumbnail you've made with a fact from your research, or it might be 6 different photographs from your research. But all these social media platforms are changing all the time. You'll probably have a social media platform that you like, and you'll have lots that you don't like. And we're not trying to say you need to be on social media any more than what we are, but it's just about telling stories in different ways, putting your work in front of new audiences, building your community and that wider network, and just having some fun with what can often be quite dense subject matter. You're trying to sort of lighten it up a little bit, and you might find you learn more about your own research as a result because you've gone right into it and gone, what will interest other people? Where's the kind of standout information? And that might help you when you come to present in future and you've got a huge piece of research you want to talk about, but you've only got a 45-minute lecture. So all this process of kind of extracting the bits you think will be the most interesting, yeah, you can work on TikTok, can work as a clip from a podcast, or might work as a 6 picture Instagram carousel.
So the way that we mentioned all these things, it is a forever changing landscape. AI has come into this field now. There's some brilliant tools. Some are just at the start of their journey. So Flicky, I've used quite a lot. I use that with caution. I'm going to show you an example of a good example. I think Flicky can actually take your journal article or can take Substack and it can actually make a video. But you do need to be careful. So I have got some examples where I have put my journal article in and it's actually misrepresented some of the research, maybe some of the sample. There've been inaccuracies and completely changed some of the findings. So whenever you use an AI, obviously you've got to be critical. So as an example here, which I can show. So Flicky is free to use.
Education is changing fast. In both Rwanda and Wales, schools are working hard to prepare children for a more connected global future.
So this was the paper.
Our study brought together Rwandan primary school teachers and Welsh university educators to explore one big question: what helps and what gets in the way when people from different cultures collaborate remotely? Through video calls, lesson planning, and honest conversations, we learned a lot. The literature already showed us that collaboration boosts learning, but our project uncovered the real-world enablers and barriers. Enablers: shared goals, good planning, open communication, and just as importantly, building trust and friendships. Barriers: unstable technology, language differences, and power dynamics that sometimes made the partnership feel one-sided. Despite the challenges, both groups showed resilience and openness, proving that meaningful collaboration is possible. It's important to note this was a small-scale study, focused on one school and one university. Future research should build on these insights by exploring a wider sample of schools, teachers, and contexts. So what's next? We recommend investing in stronger tech, providing language and cultural training, creating fairer partnership frameworks, keeping communication regular and flexible, and making time to build relationships.
Stop it there. But Flicky's great, so it can condense a whole journal article into a 2-minute video. It's worth saying I did need to do some editing, so I went into CapCut, which is an editing platform. I did need to add in a few things. So text that you see there, they do provide text. Sometimes we were met with a grey screen, so I added in some videos, I added in some different stickers and things. But I just found it was brilliant to condense an 8,000 word journal article into 2 minutes. Really, really powerful. So Flicky.ai. There are other things. ChatGPT is starting to do it, but please be critical. don't just publish it without reviewing it. I'm sure you wouldn't, but it can be some inaccuracies there.
Yeah, I think Nick has mentioned Flickr. Notebook LM is one that I've been using increasingly as a lecturer, again, to distill information. So you can feed numerous academic articles into it. So you've still got to go and find those articles. It will help you search for those articles. But if you're looking for common themes or you're reviewing literature, then I think this makes sense, saves a lot of time. But what it produces is a variety of different mediums. So it will give you a short audio podcast. They're okay, they're funny. It's kind of two people with an American accent talking about the common themes from all those various articles that you fed into it. So you might find that when you're trying to disseminate your work, that it's more likely that people will listen to the 10-minute podcast that Notebook LM can make out of your work. But you can also feed multiple, numerous articles in. It will make a visual of it, an animation, or it'll make a diagram, a kind of spider thought map, or it'll make a written article, or it'll give you bullet point forms. Think about what sort of learner you are, or the people you're working with. You might be sharing your research with students. Think about how they might like information presented and displayed, and it gives you those options. Yes, it comes with all the health warnings that Nick has mentioned, and there's kind of a lot of academic bias with these AI tools at the moment because they're only searching in certain areas. So you do have to go and find certain articles that you like and you think are important and put those in. So it's still important that you do the groundwork. There's a quote around at the moment saying AI might be the answer, but what's the question? What are you asking? What are you looking for? What are you trying to get out of this? Don't use it as a shortcut. Use it as something that can support your work. And from a professional perspective, this is going back to LinkedIn, and there's lots of conversations. Whatever your part of academia is, there'll be an AI conversation around that. The thing I'm passionate about is industry, making students industry ready and industry, replicating industry scenarios at work in our academic settings. So Nick and I were at a conference earlier this year, and they said, look, AI isn't going to take your job, but someone who's really comfortable and confident and competent at using AI, they might take your job. So you don't want to fall behind in this area. You want to be aware of what's being used, and some of these new platforms are seriously powerful and can be really useful. So they're worth a try.
Yeah, and I think as an early career researcher, which I guess most of you are, I guess presenting. I know for me when I first started, and maybe that hasn't gone away in many ways, is that preparation ready for your conference presentation. Something I'm presenting at a conference next week. So what I do is I put in my own notes to Notebook LM, and it'll create a visual that I'll watch just before. So I'm very much visual learner, thinking about things visually. I watch this before I go on. So this is, I don't know if it's in a play, but it's not playing typically. But Notebook LM will change your notes into a visual video. I watch that just before, and I feel so much more confident before going on stage. Um, in terms of ethics, really, really important to think about. We're thinking about AI, thinking about the accuracy, thinking about audience awareness, sensitive topics. When you are using AI, it's really important to be critical. Obviously, don't just allow Flicky to publish without you editing, and thinking about that digital footprint because it will shape your career identity. Um, all of those things concerned with AI are really, really important if you are going to engage with it. The last thing we're going to talk about is just building a professional identity. Your online presence, your academic brand, which it is quite cringe in a way to start to think about, but unfortunately, but there's more and more coming into the field. Joe, you're brilliant at that and helping your students to do that. Any advice there in terms of how you can build a professional identity?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about professional brand and not cringing about that, because it's really important that you're respected by your peers, your colleagues, your students, your fellow staff. And I think it's just it's brilliant these days that you can build the identity that you want. So you might use Adobe Express to make a CV, and we use it to make cover letters. And like I said earlier, you can use the templates to make your LinkedIn page look nice, and it just makes everything feel consistent and recognizable. So when people start to run through LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, wherever you are, you've got a consistent brand. And in the past, that was really hard to design. But now, with all these design tools and templates, you can have that consistent brand. So it allows you to look like you're a new generation of academics. Okay, there is a very a typical version of what academics used to look and sound like in the past. I think things are changing. The type of students that are coming to university is changing. The way they learn is changing. So the way we as academics present ourselves, that has to change as well. We have to modernize, and we have to be where the students are. We have to be where the industry is. And so I think it's worth thinking about when you're in those spaces, how do you look? But just be really positive in those spaces, be really supportive of other people. When you comment, be really constructive, and it all comes around. The more you commentate on other things positively, the more it comes back and people commentate on what you write.
So we've got just 3 more slides, but we want you to stop the video now and think about, in terms of your task, your practical starting point. So it's a simple entry strategy. So thinking about what we want you to do is to write a short LinkedIn post. So my research in maybe 2, 3 points. We'd like you to join some LinkedIn groups. And we'd like you, as Joe mentioned there, and thinking about that, building your networks and that positive sort of engagement with community. So we'd like you to comment on 3 posts in your field. Try to make it manageable. We're not expecting you to go into all these different platforms. And if you would prefer to go on to Instagram, if you'd prefer to go on to Substack, for example, please do. But we want you just to dip your toe into this different world as a task. So if you want to pause the video now, take a screenshot, and this is your task. Sort of key takeaways, which Joe's just sort of gone over, but it's really important that there's so many tools that are out there. Social media is really an opportunity, not just a distraction. AI can be absolutely fantastic if it's used critically. And I'd start small but stay consistent. So we've given you some with a task and some of the ideas to go away with. Anything else you wanted to finish with, Joe?
No, I just think it's a really innovative space now, and it's an opportunity for an academic to to amplify their message and put their work out there, and to be, actually, this sounds ridiculous, kind of select in your field. You want to be the go-to person, and that's what Nick is in education. I hope that's what I am in sort of sports broadcast technology and sports broadcast media, because you want to be invited to a conference where you can talk about your work. It's a competitive space out there. There's lots of other academics who want to go to conference and talk about what they've been researching on, and we should want to talk about what we've been researching. But if you want to get noticed and you want your research to be talked about, then this is a really useful way to put your work out there, especially work you've been studying really hard for 3 years. You don't want it to disappear onto a shelf in the library. You want it out there. You want it visible. You want it being talked about. And this is a tool that will support that.
And this is a quote I've taken from one of my supervisors, Professor Gary Beecham. Your research deserves an audience that echoes in my brain. As Joe mentioned there, when I first started out, some of my research would just sit on a shelf and no one would ever know about it and no one would ever read it. And I think things have changed now where, some of these ideas we've given you today, you can really get out your ideas to a wider audience. Visibility matters, impact matters. And, if you're not shouting about it, you won't be part of that wider conversation. So thanks very much for your time. If you've got any questions, please get in touch with myself or Joe. Good luck. And we'd love to start to see some of your ideas, research out as part of that wider conversation. Cheers.
Thank you.